Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, whatever time it is. I'm Shaelene. This is Kathryn. If we haven't met you before, hello, it's so nice to be here with you. I had to use an incredible amount of skillfulness to get on this call with you today. Everything in the world that could have gone wrong did go wrong, per usual. I mean, why would it go any other way? But thankfully, I have so many different skills to call on. And it's very fitting that these life lessons would show up as I'm, teaching this webinar today with Kathryn on the idea of lack of progress. Like, what is the problem that keeps happening that we can't really get our fingers on to help our clients move forward? And I was thinking of that because I had this issue with the computer and technology happen a couple weeks ago. And I ran to get my husband's computer. And then in the middle of using his computer or trying to get it going, I stopped everything and abandoned ship because I realized he hasn't touched his computer since he got it and it doesn't even have Google Chrome on it. And so then today when I went to get it, I was still frustrated that it didn't have Google Chrome. And I thought to myself, but why didn't I just fix it then? Like, there's a lack of progress on his end. It didn't evolve. It didn't change. Nothing, if nothing changes, nothing will change, right? So it's very fitting. I think it was like a life lesson for me to come into this today. So nevertheless, we're going to get right into it because we don't have a lot of time together today. I know that there are people that are on this call that are DBT clinicians, and there's also a big amount of people on the call that have never done DBT before. So regardless, we're hoping that wherever you are in your DBT journey, that you're walking away from this webinar with a couple of tools to use with your clients who get really stuck when you feel like things aren't changing. So with all of that being said, Kathryn, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, so as Shaelene said, we're going to just talk about a couple tools that I think could be helpful whether you're doing DBT or not. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is something called location perspective. So those of you that are part of DBT or who are trained in that, you might have heard this term as a type of or a way of validating your client. But for those of you that are not familiar, the concept of location perspective is that you begin with helping the client sort of become more at ease by painting a picture, usually verbally, that helps them understand that you really know where they're at. Because oftentimes I think, like with lack of progress, what gets in the way is that you're talking about what you believe is needed to help them move from where they are right now to where their goals are. And they're hearing you. And so they have their own understanding of what you're saying. You have your own understanding of what you're saying. And if those two are aligned, things go really well. So, for example, if Shaelene and I are talking about this webinar and both of us are talking about what points we want to teach or something like that, and my understanding of that is the same as her understanding of that, well, then we're probably going to come together with the exact same points and we're going to be able to flow really easily. But if I'm saying something that's, how I'm seeing it one way and she's hearing it and she's maybe sort of nodding along, but her idea of what I'm saying is something different, well, then when you show up to the day, it's like things don't quite go so smoothly. And this happens with our clients all the time. And I want to use a quick story. So I have a client who, and I'm guessing you probably all have one like this. I have multiple like this who have what I might label more as like a phobia around emotions. So the thought of even having emotions or having to feel whatever she might be feeling in a given moment is terrifying to her based on a lot of past history with invalidation and trauma and all sorts of things. So at the first hint of any sort of emotional experience, her natural urge is to want to avoid it, to shut it down, to try to contain it. And so I'll talk with her in session about actually how important it is for her to experience her emotions, to express them, and might even teach her skills for how to do that, and all of those sorts of things. And as I'm talking, she might think, oh yeah, I understand that. But what she might have in the back of her mind, and what I've noticed in this particular situation, is that she's sort of in agreement, but she doesn't realize that when I'm saying feel your emotions, I'm including the tightening of her throat. Like when emotion will come up, her throat will almost close, like she's very teary and it's painful in her throat, or sometimes in her chest and breathing, it becomes difficult to do. And so when she has that experience, she thinks this is dangerous, like I can't do, like I'm not going to survive this, and does not realize that when I'm saying we've got to proceed and let you feel these things, that I mean that too, even that sensation. And so she'll notice it and she'll read that cue as this huge stop sign, like, oh my gosh, this isn't safe, I shouldn't do this, and not realize that, you know, in the agreement that the two of us had previously about actually going through and experiencing the emotion, that part was included. And so she'll kind of stop or shut down or in some way like disconnect from whatever practice we might be doing, not realizing, you know, that that's like all part of it. So location perspective includes some way that the therapist has to do a little bit of, for those of you that are DBT people, this is V3 or level 3 validation, mind reading. Like you kind of get yourself a little bit into your client's shoes and try to understand exactly what it is that they might be thinking or understanding about a situation that they aren't saying out loud, and be able to voice it so that you can kind of get on the same page. So then when, you know, in this situation, that would mean I would be thinking like, what is actually going on in this person's body and experience that I might be able to kind of call out that they're not saying, that I could say like, hey, I'm wondering if this is what's happening for you. And maybe that's like something that you're afraid of. So being able to kind of voice it when they haven't yet is the first step. And then to be able to normalize that in such a way that helps you guide them through the process. So a great metaphor that has been used for location perspective historically is one of like giving directions to someone who's under distress, right? So they need to get to a hospital and they call the hospital and they're urgent, like they've got to get there quickly. And the person giving directions says, you know, you got to take a left at this intersection. And the person who's calling for the directions has some instinctive knowledge that left was not the way they were supposed to go. And so they're kind of like pushing back. No, I can't turn left there. No, that doesn't work. And the person giving directions needs to be able to communicate in such a way that they kind of like put the person at ease. Like, no, I know exactly where you're at. Look out the window. Do you see this, you know, McDonald's, or you see that sign over there? And that way the person can kind of rest at ease knowing, okay, this person really does know exactly where I am. They know where I'm going. I don't quite know why I should turn left here, but I'm going to trust that I will, or that that's the right thing because they've given such good description of where I'm at that I know they know where I'm at. And the same is true with clients, right? So with this client where her throat will close up, this is this cue that makes her think, no, I shouldn't turn left here. Like Kathryn's saying to do this, but I don't think I should. Like that wouldn't be wise. So for me, it's to be able to say to her, look, I know, here's what I think is going to happen. You know, as we start to talk about, maybe it's like a trauma cue or something, I suspect that you might start to feel your throat closing up and you might feel kind of pain in the back of your throat. And it might be hard to breathe for a minute. And have you ever had that experience? And, you know, hopefully she'll say, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And I'll say, look, here's what is happening in your body in those moments. This is what this is. And I know it's like really hard to face it. And you think like, I should get away from this. And let me tell you what will happen if you don't avoid it. To be able to kind of put them at ease, it's like, I know you think you shouldn't turn left here, but let me tell you a little bit about what's going to happen when you turn left. You're going to see that the road then curves, and it's okay, even though it's sort of the opposite direction you think you should go. It will get you where you want to be. And to be able to give that kind of description, it's really like settling to the nervous system, right? Because the nervous system is all in reaction, like, no, danger, don't proceed. And so as you can begin to paint that picture, that helps the person see that you actually know exactly where they are and that, you know, there's nothing to fear. This, I think, is like, that's the good stuff. That's the jam that really helps you kind of move forward. So I think often, like when I'm working with clients and I feel stuck, and I feel like sometimes this happens when I think, you know, we should be going this way. And every time we go that way, even though there may be like verbal agreement between us, it seems like something kind of gets in the way and we get stuck there. This is a good one, is to just kind of back up and start saying what you think they might be experiencing, what you think might be going on. And sometimes you might not get it right. That's okay. Like, you know, with with this level of validation. You just kind of put it out there and they may say, that's not what's going on. And then you have to back up and make sure you're understanding and listening more closely. But I do think that oftentimes this is where I get off track, is I've sort of gotten a few steps ahead and I think that we're aligned, but I haven't done a good job of really helping define the map and helping the client see that I know where they're at, that I can sort of see where things are at for them. So Shaelene, did you want to add anything on location perspective?
Yeah, that the important thing is to ensure the other person and you are talking about the same story. So their story is whatever it is that you guys are trying to move past. I think what stuck out to me, what you were saying, Kathryn, with like putting them at ease, is the assurance that the person who's guiding you, which is the therapist, that they really get it and they really do understand what it is that they're asking you to do. As opposed to, I think this would be a good idea for you, but I'm actually not sure how it's going to go or what it might look like, maybe because I've never been through something like that, or I really don't understand where you are. In DBT, the idea is that our clients are in hell and we are to help themselves to get out of hell. And so the only way to really help them do that is to give them the assurance that when they say that they're in pain or in distress, whatever that might look like, that we really are hearing them in a way that we can repeat that back to them. So they do understand, like, oh yes, this person really does get it. So you're looking for the head nod, which Kathryn is demonstrating, right? So we're looking at, when we're talking it through, the situation that keeps coming up. Listen, every time we log on, because of Zoom, right? Every time we log on to session, I ask you for your diary card, your tracking card, and you go like this, and you're like, I don't really know. And then we just kind of get stuck there. That happens each time. And I want to get a little bit more curious about it. I want to understand it a little bit better. So even in just that point, I'm like, am I right? Do you notice the same thing happens too? And I'm waiting for that person to give me the head nod to confirm, okay, we're still on the same page. If I think about the idea of using a map, I can't really give like Kathryn's saying, I can't really give someone directions if I don't have a clear understanding of where they are. And there's plenty of times where I think that in session we're on the same page, and then next week comes by and then the client's plan was just completely not what we've talked about. So you're going ahead and you're marching along on the journey and you're talking and you're maybe singing songs to get you through as you trek. And then, you realize that your client's not next to you anymore. They're like way back there, or they've gone off, and got lost in the woods or something like that. You have to go and get them back. And so the idea of location perspective is to have the client understand that we get where they really are in order to be a guide to help them move forward, and just to confirm that we're on the same page before we take any other steps. When I zoom out of it, like when I look at me and the client who are stuck in this pattern and we can't really figure out what's going on, I really have to step back and think about just with the basics, where are we and where are we trying to go? And have I thought about the steps that are going to help to get us there? Because that evolves and changes too.
I can just very quickly say one other thing. I think sometimes location perspective requires you to think a little bit outside the box, or kind of more creatively in how you're communicating with clients. So an example, I had a client who I've worked with who's had PTSD. And we've talked about this for a long time, and they sort of have, there's been shared language about how to understand PTSD, but there's always felt like at times something isn't quite aligning there. And it was actually through recommending a book that I had read, a fictional book that I just enjoyed, that one of the characters had PTSD, and I had recommended it to them. And that was the first time that I had the experience with this particular client of total head nod. They seemed to understand that I knew exactly what was going on inside them, even though it had been hard for both of us to articulate it just verbally together. So I just think sometimes these are really important moments to take your time and be creative and find ways that help people to understand that you can kind of see or understand what's going on for them.
Yes. Okay. So our first tool for lack of progress is location perspective. I'm going to go into the second one, which is a diary card. So again, I know that any DBT therapists on this call are well aware of what a diary card is, and even still, it's worth review, because I know that with my client I'm thinking of actually that I'm struggling with what our next steps are right now. There's a way in which I get overly focused on the diary card. And I think even that contributes to lack of progress. So I'm going to kind of go backwards or I'm going to introduce the diary card first, and then I'm going to speak to that part. So for anyone who's not using a diary card or isn't really sure what we're talking about, I'm going to drop an example of one in the chat. But basically the function of a diary card is really to be able to track behaviors that happen throughout the week. And you can really track anything you want on a diary card, but what you want to do is make sure that you're tracking something that's actually relevant and useful information. And so coming off this idea of location perspective and really understanding like, okay, in this set of woods, my client is there by that tree and she's sitting on a rock. Like I know exactly where she is. And so now I can help get this person out. The same idea comes with how are you getting that information? If myself and the client are on two different pages, then her descriptions of things and my understanding of things are going to remain like parallel to one another, but not really on the same page. And what I mean by that is when my clients come to session and I say, okay, so like, how are you? What's going on? How was the week? Everything was fine. It was great. And so let's say I don't have a diary card and there wasn't any way of really tracking all of this. If somebody comes into session and says like, yeah, you know, it was great, had a rough day here or there, then you might just go with that and think that things are going relatively well. But when you have a diary card or some method of tracking, let's say that person's emotions throughout the week, any urges that could become problematic. So maybe it's urges to commit suicide or to self-harm or to use substances. Then there's a way in which it can just kind of get oversimplified, just like many of us do every day when someone asks, how are you doing? And we go, we're fine. But really all of these things that happen in the week are missed when there's not some way of tracking and recording that for then the therapist to go and review. And so there's one client in particular that I think about where she always comes in and says, everything's fine. Yeah, it's pretty good. And then I look at her diary card and her urges to commit suicide are really high. She's feeling very depressed a lot of the time. She's crying a lot of the time. And so those two pictures don't match. She's telling me that she's actually not in the woods, that she's like on this little trail that has some trees, but not really that many. But when I look at it, I'm like, no, I know exactly where you are. You're in the woods. There's a lot of trees right behind you. Maybe you don't see them right now. You're right there sitting on that stone. And so again, not having the same understanding of what behaviors we're actually treating are going to make it nearly impossible to be able to move forward. And so it could be through a diary card. I just popped one in the chat and everyone will get an email of this as well. So you guys are free to take this and use it. On this diary card, I believe we're tracking emotions, substance use, there's a spot for suicidal thinking, and then you'll see all of the DBT skills on the back, which also they should be tracking. So we want to know what skillful behaviors they're doing and how does that like line up with the information that's getting targeted. But it doesn't have to look like that. You know, just having a client keep a note on their phone throughout the week. Maybe you're focusing on problematic urges to use substances. Can they rate their urges and whether or not they engaged in the behavior? Enough information about that day to help jog their memory for when they come back in session. They can also track, I mean, you can really track positive behavior as well. So maybe for, you know, weeks on end, they've been having a hard time getting to work on time and they're finally at this point where if they don't get it together, they might get fired. And so this one morning in particular, they were able to get to work on time, and you want to stop and understand that behavior to help replicate that information for them and make it a higher likelihood that they'll have success on the other days. Well, all of that information would be really helpful if it was tracked somewhere. And so a diary card is one way to do it, but it's definitely not the only way. And then I think for people who are using diary cards regularly, again, we want to make sure that you're tracking things that are actually relevant to what's going on in that person's life. And that might be different at the start of treatment versus 3 months in, 6 months in, a year in, as those targets hopefully start to shape up and don't become targets anymore. Are there new behaviors that need to get cycled in that you can watch that will help give more information to help you understand where the client is and to better help move them forward?
One thing I just think with diary cards, there's sort of a dilemma. Those of you that are already doing DBT, I think this happens often when you, there's sort of like, you know, diary card is a necessary part of a comprehensive DBT session. Like you should always be reviewing diary cards, and so it becomes almost sort of this rule-based thing that therapists get a little stuck on, but it's there for a reason. And so sometimes I think when you start doing it just because it's what you're supposed to do, it can lose its purposefulness. That's a word. And so you want to make sure that it always stays really meaningful in your sessions. So often I think about if you have to pare down your diary card to just 2 or 3 things that are being tracked and make it much more meaningful to you and the client. So when you come into the session, the only things that are tracked are things that you both really care about and want to talk about and make sure that you're attending to, then that's all you should track, and you may not be tracking everything else. And you want to make sure that whatever those 2 or 3 things are things that are of highest importance. So, like suicidal behavior, if somebody has suicidal ideation or suicidal behavior happening, you would want to make sure that that stays on the diary card. So I just think sometimes diary cards can get really complicated. Like there's a lot that people track. So on one hand, like if you're feeling like you're not making progress with a client, it might be because you aren't clear on targets or the targets aren't shared between you and your client. And so no diary cards being used and it's not, you're not able to stay focused on targets. So that would be a time to like make sure you're implementing that and using it. And then other times you might get stuck not making progress because you're using a diary card, but you're not, it's sort of like form over function rather than function over form. So in those cases, you want to back up and say, well, I'm kind of following the rules. I'm using a diary card, but am I using it in the way that it's most meaningful and it's most purposeful? So in those cases, back up, pare down your targets if you need to. And when I think about what goes on the diary card, it's really something that it's a behavior that we've defined as something to either increase or decrease. So it can be as simple as just yes or no, this happened. And that can organize my session. So maybe I have a client in stage 3 who's not, got life-threatening targets. So my diary card may need to change and be updated. So we're tracking, did they go to work on that day? And that's, although I think that might be more of a stage 1 quality of life target, but, maybe they have a desire to like be exercising more.
I was going to say like increasing exercise or increasing their mindfulness practice or something like that.
Exactly. So I just have them tracking a behavior as a yes or no thing, one that they are motivated to change and that we're committed to together. And it can really help organize our session quickly.
And just as I mentioned, so for anyone who, again, is new to DBT or has not been trained in DBT yet, this is a DBT focused diary card. So you'll see things on here like, did they use phone coaching? Did they attend skills group? That might not be relevant to you if you're not doing DBT. But down here, I wanted to pull everyone's attention to the space to write in other target behaviors that feel more relevant to the client, targets to decrease, and then goals being a behavior to increase. And then these are all the skills on the back. And then Kathryn, did you want to talk about the wiki too as a resource?
Yeah, so I'm just putting in the chat right now. This is a link to, there's a DBT therapist wiki, and I'll just warn you that a lot of that page doesn't get managed anymore. So other topics on the wiki may not have like up-to-date links, but the diary cards are still up to date. So there's like probably 20 different versions of diary cards. If you're interested in implementing one and you haven't ever used a diary card before, or you just want to see some other versions, you can download those and just kind of look through, see which ones fit you. But I'll tell you, I also just make diary cards on my own with clients on a regular basis. It's just a table like what Shaelene had just put up there with targets that are yes or no. So if there's one that, like I have a client for whom other pre-made diary cards aren't fitting very well. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, just a little table with the days and the behaviors that you're tracking, and yes or no can be, a simple and very straightforward way to help keep you both on target.
Okay, and so we've talked about our first tool, which is location perspective. The second is a diary card or some form of tracking in order to help move your clients forward on what feels like a lack of progress for them. And Kathryn will share the third tool, which is the use of metaphor, which we've already done like 3 times, because can you get through a DBT talk without having some example about being stuck in a river or in the woods or something?
Yeah, it's true. Metaphors are everything in DBT, but I also feel like I can't get away from them in my own life. I use metaphors all the time. So metaphors are really useful because they take real life and complicated problems where everything feels sort of impossible or stuck, and tells stories or uses images to help think outside the box, think in more creative ways or just different ways about the same old problem. And I think of metaphor as really like the best metaphors, at least, are the ones that I can connect with on like a visceral level. Like I can feel it in my body. And not everybody, we're all different. We're all wired differently. And I think I'm a more sort of like artistic type of person. And so I think of things in like images and stories all the time. And not everybody does. So it may come naturally to you and it may not come naturally to you. But I've got a worksheet. This is one that Shaelene and I had. Oh, can you share it?
I'll put it in the chat too. So you guys should be able to open these right from the chat and download them, but they'll also get emailed back to you.
And are you able to share on screen or should I? Yeah, okay. So I just think, it comes naturally to some people to come up with metaphors. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. And for other people, it takes a little more work. So this is just a little like step-by-step if you are having a hard time coming up with metaphors or trying to think through what would be a good one. But this is sort of like how I generally think about it. When I start, I'm like, what is the problem in real terms? So maybe the problem that I'm having or I'm working on with a client is that they have a lot of suicidal thoughts in the day, or they have a lot of hopeless thoughts or, sort of like dead end kind of thinking. And try as they may, this is just like kind of plaguing them. Okay, so this is the problem in real terms. These thoughts pop up in their mind, despite the fact that they might be really committed to personally really wanting those thoughts to go away and to change. So that's the problem in real terms. When I think about the experience of this problem, this is step 2. It's like you have to kind of step into the experience of that problem and see what your body feels like, see what comes up for you, see what memories or other stories you may have had in your life that kind of parallel that. So when I think about this particular one of thoughts just kind of plaguing me, or like even though I'm trying not to think about something like suicide or something like that, it just keeps popping up. When I step into that problem, it feels like this inevitable thing that I just can't get control over and I'm scared of. So the metaphor that came to my mind as I was thinking through this is one of rafting down a river. So not everybody's done this, so I'll just help with a little image of it. But when you go rafting in a river, there's lots of stretches that are pretty calm and you're just floating. And it can be very easy and very relaxing. And then when you hit rapids, what happens is that rapids, meaning like the whitewater portion of the river, what happens, whether you like it or not, is that water splashes into the boat and it will splash the people on the boat and it will get water in the base of the boat. And this is all normal. You can't stop it. The only way to not have the water splash in, I suppose, is to not go through the rapids. But as you're floating down the river, you can't continue and not go through the rapids. Like they're one and the same. Continuing means going through the rapids. And this is sort of like life, right? Like we all have periods, stretches of our life where things go smoothly, where maybe we don't struggle with thoughts of suicide or thoughts of hurting ourselves or whatever else, our clients might have as sort of these like these thoughts that plague them. But then inevitably, they're going to hit rapids. Things will be tough in their life from time to time. And sometimes they have a lot of rapids and sometimes they have a few, but this will happen just as it happens in the river. And so when I think about like kind of stepping into the experience of this problem with thoughts that just kind of come and you wish that they didn't, and it's really hard to control them, is remembering what it's like when you're in the boat and the water splashes in and you have to decide like, am I going to pail all this water out? No, I don't necessarily have to pail it out. I can just see that there's water in the base of the boat and not worry too much about it, because actually it's a natural part of rafting in the river. But I'm also not going to start pailing a bunch of water into the boat. Just because some water splashed in doesn't mean I'm going to try to help it along and bring it in. So at the end of the day, this is mindfulness to current thoughts, the practice of just observing what happens when you go through the rapids, the way that your thoughts kind of come and go, not egging them on or clinging to them or trying to control them all the time and making them always go away, but instead sort of sitting in a position where you can observe the coming and going of those thoughts without acting on them. So this particular metaphor came up for me just by kind of stepping in and feeling that sensation in my body of like, what does it feel like, or what memories come up when I'm encountering something that, try as I may, I can't control, but it's not the end of the world. Like the thought itself is not tragic. It's just a thing that I can't control that maybe makes me a little anxious. And that was the metaphor that I came up with. So in this case, like on that worksheet, that last step, I might either draw a picture or, write a little story. But these are helpful ones to share with your clients, like especially when you get to a place when you're kind of, you and your client are not making the progress that you guys thought you would. And maybe there's some discouragement on either side. Either you're feeling kind of discouraged or maybe your client is. I think it is helpful to kind of go through that process and figure out what is a good metaphor for where they're at in their treatment that you two could work on together and have an image that would help you think through like more creative and even like visceral, like body-based kind of experiencing to help think outside the box and move things forward.
Yeah, I think it's especially helpful in your subsequent sessions, because whenever it is that thing happens again, you can just refer to, wait, are we responding to all of the water in the raft right now, or do we just need to keep moving? And so it's really easy for both of you to just kind of, yeah, okay, we're doing it again. Let's just go ahead and keep this going. The other thing that works really well with creating metaphors, if you're finding it hard, is just to think about different movies or shows that you've seen. I use that a lot too. I had a client who, again, we would just come up with these really, what I thought were airtight plans. Clearly they weren't, because then the person would come back to session the following week having done whatever the target behavior was. And I remember one time we were talking about how basically they kept getting into this relationship that they had deemed emotionally abusive and knew in their wise part that this just was not a relationship they should continue engaging in. And so we would have this plan down to, change the person's name on the phone to like, this is a terrible idea. And really everything I thought we could think of, we had problem solved for. And then the following week, all of a sudden, this person's back at this guy's house and going through it again. And I remember thinking about it and just being like, man, it's like as soon as she crosses it, part of it had to do with her going into a certain part of town. And when she would drive in that direction, something would change because it also was on the way to this person's house. And so she would be really feeling strong and solid in the plan as well. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to follow these skills. But what we didn't pay attention to was the fact that when she went through this certain part of her drive, it was kind of like she went into Oz. For anyone who's seen Wizard of Oz, it's like they're walking all around and then they get to that field of pink. I don't know if they were flowers or something, but it was like in the air. And then everyone just kind of got woozy. Poppies. Yeah, makes sense, right? So they just got woozy and then they all like took a nap. And I was like, that part, it's kind of like you're driving and the part of you that's like really skillful and ready is there. But then I don't know, you go and you see the landscape and then, the temperature in the air changes. And then next thing you know, you're completely hijacked in an emotion mind. And then you're all of a sudden like changing your route and you drive right to this person's house. And she was like, that's exactly what it's like. I feel like I'm hypnotized. And so what did that do? One, it gave us wording to ensure that we were both on the same page. It also gave us some insight that we were planning really hard, but we were actually planning to solve the wrong problem. We did a lot of planning for when this person was at home and when they were nowhere near this person that they were trying to avoid, but we didn't problem solve for the most problematic part, which is that she couldn't avoid that route. And every time she went on that route, she just ended up over at this person's house. And so we were able to take if I'm trying to hit a target, a bullseye, we were able to take it from like way out here to making it super concise and tight. And so that way, with just a few couple of tweaks to the plan that focused on her in that moment, she was able to change and then no longer kept getting hypnotized and driving over there. I also gave the example, I don't know if it was the same person, but it was a similar situation with the upside down for anyone who's seen Stranger Things. Just kind of like, it feels like you're there, but it's really not the same thing. Like everything really looks familiar to you, but it's actually different and it's very toxic to you. So if you're struggling with coming up with a metaphor, know that you can use like movies, shows, songs, really anything to help ensure, number one, that you guys are on the same page. And number two, that you both are understanding and agreement, like, yes, this is a target for me. I've done this a couple of times and it's worked out really well.
Yeah, I feel like oftentimes the best metaphors don't even come from me. Like I'll sit there in session and think like, this sounds so familiar. This is a great, like, I want to come up with a way of understanding this, and clients will present the metaphor. They'll say it's like this or it's like that.
Mm-hmm.
And those are also, that's where I would start. If they've got a good way of describing it, like work from there.
Yeah, it's also something that you can do a deliberate practice on. So if you find yourself struggling in this way and you look at the worksheet we gave and your mind just kind of goes blank, it's something that you can practice. So practice it with your partner or your team and other colleagues and say, like, I'm trying to find a different way to describe this scenario. When I share this with you, what comes up? So don't feel like if it's hard for you to come up with them, that it's just impossible. Just focus on it and refine that skill, because it's definitely one to build.
And I think you could also use it with clients too, like take that worksheet out. If you are feeling stuck, they're feeling stuck too. This is like, just call it out in your session. Like, look, we're both feeling a little unclear of how we move forward or what's getting us kind of stuck in this place. Like, and you could both sit down and just write about it, draw about it, write a story about it, and see how closely they align, or, where there's similarities, or how you could work with whatever metaphors or images they come up with.
Yeah.
So I think it's a nice joint practice.
The last thing I'll say about this, I think the rafting one was a really great one, because I think it's especially hard. So again, we're thinking lack of progress. When your client's target behavior is really high risk, it's very scary. And so it's hard to target something that's really scary when you're always just talking about it. And you end up talking about it a lot when it's really scary. So an example might be suicidal thinking. So if clients coming in, and you both already know and agree that that's a target, but in some ways you just get so anxious about it that you keep asking them questions about it and really nothing has changed. You can't move forward because you're spending all of your time talking about the fact that they're suicidal, maybe convincing them that they shouldn't be suicidal, instead of focusing on what is the problem that happened 2 steps before the suicidal thinking that triggered suicidal thinking as some sort of response to manage that problem, right? And so if I'm in the raft and every time water comes in, I'm grabbing my towel and I'm trying to dry it up, I'm getting way over focused on something that's just kind of a part of the process. And so the use of the metaphor is like, okay, this is happening. Like, and I might even use that for myself. Okay, like, water's in the boat, this is scary. Are you going to act on those plans? Has anything changed? Okay, I want to spend most of our time talking about what happened before then, so that way we can actually move. What's that?
What are the rapids actually in that metaphor? Like, what is the problem that
Right.
you've now hit, that when you hit it, you can't avoid the fact that these thoughts kind of start popping up.
Right.
And yes, we want to attend to make sure that you're not acting on the thoughts, but what's most important in this case is to recognize that they're a learned behavior, and they're naturally probably going to come up in most difficult situations. And so we have to learn to deal with those difficult situations, understand what the rapid is in that moment, and see what solutions could be brought in or used to kind of help you navigate that rapid or that difficult scenario more effectively.
Yeah. Okay, so just to recap, so our first tool for lack of progress is location perspective, understanding where the client is so we can help them move from point A to B. We want to be really clear on where they are at point A, get the head nod, and help them move forward. The second tool that we have for lack of progress is using diary cards or some form of tracking, but always making sure that whatever we're tracking is actually relevant to the problem that's happening now in their lives, again, to help move them forward. And ensuring, especially for those of us who are already doing DBT, that we're not getting overly focused on what is the phrase always, Kathryn? Principle over protocol. We want to not get super attached to, well, this is DBT and we do diary cards, and get so attached to the fact that the diary card is something we have to do, that we're spending way too long tracking stuff that's not relevant, or spending way too long going back and forth, trying to convince the client to do the diary card. Like, these things are important, and yet the purpose is to get the snapshot of what happened so that way you can better target it to move forward. And then the third tool for lack of progress is use of metaphor. Again, it helps us to ensure client and I are on the same page. It also helps to get us moving. And the other thing that it helps us do is to kind of quickly recap something and have the language to call it out when it's happening for both therapist and client involved in the session. So at this time, we'd love to answer some questions. If anybody has questions related to the tools or lack of progress in general, you can go ahead and put them either in the chat or in Q&A, whatever feels easiest and most accessible. There was one question about getting trained in DBT, and I will talk a little bit about some training options as well as another free open house we have coming up later this year. But I want to give a little time if there are other questions that people might have about any of the tools that we talked about today.
Yeah, so DBT Wiki, that link is in the chat. And this is just so people know that this was put together by a group called Practice Ground, which was a online training organization that's no longer active. The wiki, there, like I said, the diary cards that are on there are still accessible. So if you go to that link, I think there's about 20 different versions that you could download and use if you wanted. And then there's a bunch of other resources on the wiki, but just know that there's a lot of the links and some of the other sections don't work anymore, and there's no one that monitors it. So if you find, there's some stuff on there you might get excited about and it may not be accessible. So I apologize. If you can't find what you want, I will put that link again.
Also, there are other diary card options and apps as well. So just wanting to mention that.
Shaelene, just so you know, I don't have access, for some reason it only lets me send to hosts and panelists.
Oh, you have to change it, but I think I just put it back in there. I'll make sure.
Okay, if you could, because it doesn't give me an option to send to everyone.
Yep, so it's in there, it's in the chat, it just went in there again. Can the diary card be used online? Where is the link to the diary? Okay, just put that in. Diary cards, can they be used online? You would just have to modify it to make it, you can make ones that are like typable versions. The one I sent was a PDF, so you probably can't type in that, but there are apps that you can, like if you just search diary card apps, there are apps in the App Store that you can use as well.
Like Surveys is a very popular one that you can edit and adjust.
Yeah.
And I know I have a lot of clients that use those, and colleagues too.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like, especially if you have clients where you might want to be doing much more like modified diary cards that are more like just very specific to them. Like I talked about paring down to maybe 2 or 3 targets. In that case, sometimes I'll just make a table in like a Google Doc that my client and I share on my through my business Google Drive. And that way it's super easy. They can access it on their phone, and it doesn't have to be anything complicated.
Yeah, and that's another one too, like just having your client open up a note on their phone and you guys create a template of what they're going to track together, and they just copy and paste it each week or however frequent you guys are tracking those behaviors. So it doesn't have to look like this, because again, the function is really just to see what's happening and to be able to target it more effectively, because you have more, I don't want to, not concise information, precise information, instead of the client coming in and be like, yeah, it was a fine week. What happened? I don't know. I don't really know. Week went by really quickly. So it helps to put our glasses on to see what we're actually working with. Okay. Question came in: feeling stuck when a client says DBT doesn't work. I begin to feel I need to defend DBT, and it's not always helpful. I think anytime, this is for anybody, anytime we feel like we're like at tension with the client, then we're probably stuck in something that's not working. So I think first and foremost, being able to have the awareness to say like, okay, there's tension here, tension is happening, and being able to just sit back and take a breath in your seat for a moment to realign with your client in the session, because tension and tension coming up against one another is going to keep you both frustrated and make it hard to move forward. And in terms of like defending whatever model it is that you're doing, I mean, there probably is a nugget of truth of that, in that moment for them. Like maybe at that moment, it doesn't feel like DBT is working for them, and it's valid to feel that way. But you're right. I think if you get stuck on like, well, yes, it is working, and look at this and this and this, you guys are just kind of going to be at odds, and that tension is just going to get maintained. What do you think, Kathryn?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, I feel like the one thing to keep in mind, especially when the urge to defend the treatment comes up, is actually like it's just not 100% effective. It never has been. it's not going to work for everybody. And so there is a way in which I would be inclined to sort of let go and say, I mean, I think it's a conversation that requires mindfulness, like your own connecting to your own wise mind and really trying to understand where the conversation is coming up in the person's life. So for example, if they're coming into session and it's like a really tense session, or your solutions that you're putting out there are ones that they just don't think are going to work. So then I would be asking, like, I might pause with my client and say, like, let's see if we could back up for a second. Like, did you feel like DBT wasn't working before this conversation happened? Because I'm wondering if maybe like the solutions I'm putting out there are really not going to work, but maybe it may not be all of DBT. It may just be this one conversation. So it's just a lot of assessment and kind of like staying regulated within yourself, and even accepting the fact that of course, it's not going to help everybody. It's not going to be effective for every person or problem. So you don't have to defend it. You just do it and see if it works. And if the client wants to keep trying, then you can keep trying and keep seeing if it works and move slowly to assess what might be getting in the way.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that image again with the water coming in the boat. Like as therapists, as the client's putting stuff out, it's like, what are we going to respond to? Not necessarily saying that you would just ignore it and move on. But if the client's still there and willing to do it, despite having these feelings of like, this doesn't work and I think this kind of sucks, but they're still showing up to session, giving you the diary card, doing what you ask. It's like, can we acknowledge that you're feeling like that in this way, but also not bring the towel up and start drying the raft that we're in as it's happening? Because again, I think it just kind of reinforces the feeling that you're not moving forward, because then you're spending time trying to prove to your client that, DBT is great and it's wonderful and all of those other things. And yeah, she said there's an assumption if they're using skills that they will feel better. I mean, sometimes yes and sometimes no, but I think as long as things aren't getting worse in that moment, that's probably something to pay attention to. But my signal for myself and in supervision is to pay attention to when I'm sitting forward in the chair. So if I'm sitting forward, I'm like ready to battle. And that's just not that's not the part that needs to be present in session. I need to cue myself that whenever I feel myself forward and I can feel that frustration building, I need to sit back and open up the palms of my hands to practice my own DBT skills and get regulated and not get stuck in drying out every single drop of the boat that, when that comes up.
Yeah, I feel like just really good assessment around that kind of stuff is helpful. Like really not being attaching yourself to one outcome or other, but really trying to understand, like, where did the thought come from? If DBT is not effective, or the skills don't make me feel better, therefore they're not useful. Like these thoughts come from somewhere, they're queued up somewhere, they're reinforced in some cases, and we just want to understand actually what's happening with the thought itself.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we answered all of the questions that came up. I'm going to talk a little bit about the DBT starter pack. So somebody asked, where can they get fully trained in DBT? You can get trained fully in DBT right here with us. Our training starts in September. It's 32 CEs, and early bird pricing is just for this week. So registration just opened up this morning, and it's only going to be open through Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern time at this price. So after that, if you sign up, the registration won't open up again until I think August. But you'll miss the early bird pricing. So hopefully this is the time that you sign up and grab your spot. If you're a team of at least 5 people or more, you'll get another discount on top of that. This training is the training that you need to be able to get started doing DBT work. So a lot of questions that generally come up is, do I have to be a part of a team? In order to be offering comprehensive DBT, you do have to be a part of a team, but you don't have to have that before you start this training. As a matter of fact, when we ran Starter Pack last year, a lot of people came to the training and connected for purposes of a team within the training. So you just want to make sure that you join a team prior to starting to see clients, but you don't have to be a part of a team in order to sign up for the training. Part of this training is access to a course that you'll see on the Rebel Mente website, facilitating skills groups. It's an on-demand course. So you'll get access to that, I think, pretty quickly after you sign up. We'll send that to you early so you don't have to wait. And that comes with your sign up. And the entire training equals at least 40 it might technically even be a little more hours of training. So if you ever wanted to pursue DBT Linehan board certification, this training would meet the training part of the criteria for that. I'm going to go ahead and pop the link in here for registration, so that way people have it. And then the other thing that I'm also going to put in is our next open house that's coming up in August. I think it's actually a month away from today, to be exact.
Mhm.
Let me put this in here. So that's the link for that. And then the webinar that's coming up in August. Let me show you guys what this looks like. So this is on finding wisdom during chaotic times, tools for therapists and clients. Kathryn, do you want to speak a little bit to why we created this because I feel like we talked about it for a long time.
Yeah, look, here's the thing, guys. Our consultation team, I feel like all of the therapists are struggling with like huge challenges. Like this is a pretty chaotic time to be a therapist. And I feel like I notice it on my consultation team. I notice it with people that I supervise and consult to. And then I notice it, of course, with people that aren't therapists. I mean, it's just there's a lot of processes occurring around the world right now that just make doing the work that we're doing very difficult. There's like things that go against the work that we're trying to do to help people because their environments, the social environments that we're all a part of are just, rife with invalidation and with all kinds of judgmental messages coming at us all the time. There's chaos in the world. There's just so many things that make it so difficult. And so, I think our consultation team has been really focused on like, how do we all stay well? Because we're out there trying to help other people stay well and help them figure out not only how to survive, but even, hopefully thrive and find a way to build a life worth living for themselves as well as for their loved ones. And we all have to be able to do it too. So it's a topic that I feel really particularly passionate about. I know Shaelene has as well. And I hope that all of you are interested in it as well, because I think one thing that I worry about in our field is just that the therapists are out there trying to help everybody else. And there's just, you're all in it too. And it's difficult and it's painful. And so I want to be thinking together and like imagining how do we all stay well and help others stay well through this period of time. So that's what we're going to talk about, some of the things that Shaelene and I have talked about and have found helpful, and others as well. So
yeah, the word that comes to mind is sustainability. How do we sustain our career as therapists in a time when just living as a human can be incredibly difficult with different things that are going on in the world? And then being the person that sits there and is kind of the container for all of the things that come up, and figuring out how do we help our clients move forward when there's just so much pain and suffering in the things that are going on. And Kathryn and I have talked a lot about this as well, but one of the reasons that I just love DBT so much is because of the practice that it makes me do as a DBT therapist. And so when I think about sustainability as a therapist, DBT really comes to mind. And it's kind of ironic because we treat one of the hardest populations there are. I mean, there are plenty of people who just would say absolutely no to treating people who are suicidal and struggling with emotion dysregulation and self-harm and other high-risk behaviors, substance abuse, things like that. And so ironically, in that population, and one of the toughest populations, I still find a lot of strength as a therapist because of the structure and the tools that DBT has to offer, whether it's having a consultation team or the strategies that are used in that, the ability to be reciprocal with your clients and to be real about the things that are going on in the therapy relationship that just are not working in order to help you move forward. I mean, DBT has so many different interventions and strategies that other models that are really great models, they just don't have them. And that's one of the things I appreciate about it the most. It's like you're in this position of treating clients that are generally really difficult to get moving forward, but the structure that's involved in it and all of the tools and the interventions that are involved are the thing that help you do that. And so it's kind of a catch-22, but it works out so nicely and so well. And I also appreciate having other DBT therapists in my life, like Kathryn. So when my morning is completely falling apart because I was going to do this webinar and my computer stopped working, she can coach me on those things. And we practice the same stuff that we're preaching to our clients. And so there's just a level of really nice authenticity that comes with that as well. So we would love to have you in the starter pack training. If you're not a DBT therapist and you're looking to join the tribe, there's plenty of room for you in the world of DBT. I know I recognize some of the names on here. Some of y'all have reached out to me already about getting signed up. So we're excited about that. If you have any questions, everyone who's on here is going to get on the Rebel Mente email list. So if there's ever questions, you can just reply to one of the emails. But again, make sure you grab your spot before pricing goes up on Friday. And I think that's about it. There aren't any other questions. Thank you all for coming to this and for everyone who signed up and is watching it at home. We hope that these tools are something that can not only help your clients move forward, but help you feel better in the work that you're doing because you were able to help them do that. Okay. Take good care, everybody. We'll see you next time, maybe in August for our next open house. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining.